Joy family, welcome to the Joyful House and welcome to Once Upon a Storybook. It is Sunday, November the 16th, and we are continuing our Anne of Green Gables series with book number 4, Anne of Windy Poplar. Today we're going to be reading in the third year, chapters 3, 4, and chapter 5. Yes, we're going to do 3 chapters today instead of our normal 2 because they're rather short chapters. So if you are ready, sit back, relax, and let's enjoy this storybook adventure. Chapter 3. At 2 o'clock, Mr. James Gran called. Mr. Gran was the chairman of the high school board of trustees and had matters of importance to talk of, which he wished to discuss fully before he left on Monday to attend an educational conference in Kingsport. Could he come to Windy Poplars in the evening? Asked Anne. Unfortunately, he couldn't. Mr. Gran was a good sort of man in his own fashion, but Anne had long ago found out that he must be handled with gloves. Moreover, Anne was very anxious to get him on her side in a battle royal over new equipment that was looming up. She went out to the twins. Darlings, will you play nicely out in the backyard while I have a little talk with Mr. Gran? I won't be very long, and then we'll have an afternoon tea picnic on the banks of the pond, and I'll teach you to blow soap bubbles with red dye in them, the loveliest things. Will you give us a quarter apiece if we behave? Demanded Gerald. No, Gerald dear, said Anne firmly. I'm not going to bribe you. I know you're going to be good, just because I ask you, as a gentleman should. We'll be good, Miss Shirley, promised Gerald solemnly. Awful good, echoed Geraldine, with equal solemnity. Is it possible they would have kept their promise if Ivy Trent had not arrived almost as soon as Anne was closeted with Mr. Gran in the parlor? But Ivy Trent did arrive, and the Raymond twins hated Ivy Trent, the impeccable Ivy Trent who never did anything wrong and always looked as if she had just stepped out of a bandbox. On this particular afternoon, there was no doubt that Ivy Trent had come over to show off her beautiful new brown boots and her sash and shoulder bows and hair bows of scarlet ribbon. Mrs. Raymond, whatever she lacked in some respects, had fairly sensible ideas about dressing children. Her charitable neighbors said she put so much money on herself that she had none to spend on the twins, and Geraldine never had a chance to parade the streets in the style of Ivy Trent, who had a dress for every afternoon in the week. Miss Trent always arrayed her in spotless white. At least Ivy was always spotless when she left home. If she were not quite so spotless when she returned, that, of course, was the fault of the jealous children with whom the neighborhood abounded. Geraldine was jealous. She longed for scarlet sash and shoulder bows and white embroidered dresses. What would she not have given for button brown boots like those? How do you like my new sash and shoulder bows? Asked Ivy proudly. How do you like my new sash and shoulder bows? Mimicked Geraldine tauntingly. But you haven't got shoulder bows, said Ivy grandly. But you haven't got shoulder bows, squeaked Geraldine. Ivy looked puzzled. I have so. Can't you see them? I have so. Can't you see them? Mocked Geraldine, very happy in this brilliant idea of repeating everything Ivy said scornfully. They ain't paid for, said Gerald. Ivy Trent had a temper. It showed itself in her face, which grew as red as her shoulder bows. They are too. My mother always pays her bills. My mother always pays her bills, chanted Geraldine. Ivy was uncomfortable. She didn't know exactly how to cope with this, so she turned to Gerald, who was undoubtedly the handsomest boy on the street. Ivy had made up her mind about him. I came over to tell you I'm going to have you for my beau, she said, looking eloquently at him out of a pair of brown eyes that even at 7, Ivy had learned had a devastating effect on most of the small boys of her acquaintance. Gerald turned crimson. "I won't be your beau," he said. "But you've got to be," said Ivy serenely. "But you've got to be," said Geraldine, wagging her head at him. "I won't be," shouted Gerald furiously. "And don't you give me any more of your lip, Ivy Trent." "You have to be," said Ivy stubbornly. "You have to be," said Geraldine. Ivy glared at her. "You just shut up, Geraldine Raymond." "I guess I can talk in my own yard," said Geraldine. "Course she can," said Gerald. "And if you don't shut up, Ivy Trent, I'll just go over to your place and dig the eyes out of your doll." Wow, this is violent. "My mother would spank you if you did," cried Ivy. "Oh, she would she? Well, do you know what my mother would do to her if she did? She would just sock her in the nose." "Well, anyway, you've got to be my beau," said Ivy, returning calmly to the vital subject. I'll duck your head in the rain barrel," yelled the maddened Gerald. "I'll rub your face in the ants' nest. I'll tear them bows and sash off you triumphantly," for this at least was feasible. "Let's do it," squealed Geraldine. They pounced like furies on the unfortunate Ivy, who kicked and shrieked and tried to bite, but was no match for the two of them. Together they hauled her across the yard and into the woodshed, where her howls could not be heard. "Hurry," gasped Geraldine, "for Miss Shirley comes out." No time was to be lost. Gerald held Ivy's legs while Geraldine held her wrists with one hand and tore off her hair bow and shoulder bows and sash with the other. "Let's paint her legs," shouted Gerald, his eyes falling on a couple of cans of paint left there by some workmen from the previous week. "I'll hold her and you paint her." Ivy shrieked vainly in despair. Her stockings were pulled down, and in a few moments her legs were adorned with wide stripes of red and green paint. In the process, a good deal of the paint got spattered over her embroidered dress and new boots. As a finishing touch, they filled her curls with burrs. She was a pitiful sight when they finally released her. The twins howled mirthfully as they looked at her. Long weeks of airs and condescensions from Ivy had been avenged. "Now, you go home," said Gerald. "This'll teach you to go round telling people they have to be your beau." "I'll tell my mother," wept Ivy. "I'll go straight home and tell my mother on you, you horrid, horrid, hateful, ugly boy." "Don't you call my brother ugly, you stuck-up thing," cried Geraldine. "You and your shoulder bows. Here, take them with you. We don't want them cluttering up our woodshed." Ivy, pursued by the bows, which Geraldine pelted after her, ran sobbing out of the yard and down the street. "Quick, let's sneak up the back stairs to the bathroom and clean up before Miss Shirley sees us," gasped Geraldine. Chapter 4. Mr. Gran had talked himself out and bowed himself away. Anne stood for a moment on the doorstone, wondering uneasily where her charges were. Up the street and in at the gate came a wrathful lady, leading a forlorn and still sobbing atom of humanity by the hand. "Miss Shirley, where is Miss Raymond?" demanded Miss Trent. "Miss Raymond is—" "I insist on seeing Miss Raymond. She shall see with her own eyes what her children have done to poor, helpless, innocent Ivy. Look at her, Miss Shirley. Just look at her." "Oh, Miss Trent, I am so sorry. It's all my fault. Miss Raymond is away, and I promised to look after them, but Mr. Gran came—" "No, it isn't your fault, Miss Shirley. I don't blame you. No one can cope with those diabolical children. The whole street knows them. If Mrs. Raymond isn't here, there's no point in my remaining. I shall take my poor child home. But Miss Raymond, she shall hear of this. Indeed she shall. Listen to that, Miss Shirley. Are they tearing each other limb from limb?" That was a chorus of shrieks, howls, and yells that came echoing down the stairs. Anne ran upwards. On the hall floor was a twisting, wreathing, biting, tearing, scratching mess. Anne separated the furious twins with difficulty and, holding each firmly by a squirming shoulder, demanded the meaning of such behavior. "She says I've got to be Ivy Trent's beau," snarled Gerald. "So he's got to be," screamed Geraldine. "I won't be." "But you've got to be." "Children," said Anne. Something in her tone quelled them. They looked at her and saw a Miss Shirley that they had never seen before. For the first time in their young lives, they felt the force of authority. "You, Geraldine," said Anne quietly, "will go to bed for 2 hours. You, Gerald, will spend the same length of time in the hall closet. Not a word. You have behaved abominably, and you must take your punishment. Your mother left you in my charge, and you will obey me." "Then punish us together," said Geraldine, beginning to cry. "Yes, you've no right to separate us. We've never been separated," muttered Gerald. "You will be now." Anne was very still and very quiet. Meekly, Geraldine took off her clothes and got into one of the cots in their room. Meekly, Gerald entered the hall closet. It was a large, airy closet with a window and a chair, and nobody could have called the punishment an unduly severe one. Anne locked the door and sat down with the book by the hall window. At least for 2 hours she would know a little peace of mind. A peep at Geraldine a few minutes later showed her to be sound asleep, looking so lovely in her sleep that Anne almost repented her sternness. Well, a nap would be good for her anyway. When she wakened, she would be permitted to get up, even if the 2 hours had not expired. At the end of an hour, Geraldine was still sleeping. Gerald had been so quiet that Anne decided that he had taken his punishment like a man and might be forgiven. After all, Ivy Trent was a vain little monkey and had probably been very irritating. Anne unlocked the closet door and opened it. There was no Gerald in the closet. The window was open and the roof of the side porch was just beneath it. Anne's lips tightened. She went downstairs and out into the yard. No sign of Gerald. She explored the woodshed and looked up and down the street. Still no sign. She ran through the garden and through the gate into the lane that led through a patch of scrub woodland to the little pond in Mr. Robert Creedmoor's field. Gerald was happily pulling himself about on it in the small flat Mr. Creedmoor kept there. Just as Anne broke through the trees, Gerald's pole, which he had stuck rather deep in the mud, came away with unexpected ease at his third tug, and Gerald promptly shot heels over head backwards into the water. Anne gave an involuntary shriek of dismay, but there was no real cause for alarm. The pond at its deepest would not come up to Gerald's shoulders, and where he had gone over, it was little deeper than his waist. He had somehow got on his feet and was standing there rather foolishly with his aureole plaster dripping down on his head when Anne's shriek was re-echoed behind her, and Geraldine in her nightgown tore through the trees and out to the edge of the little wooden platform to which the flat was commonly moored. With a despairing shriek of "Gerald!" she took a flying leap and landed with a tremendous splash by Gerald's side and almost gave him another ducking. "Gerald, are you drowned?" cried Geraldine. "Are you drowned, darling?" "No, no, darling," Gerald assured her through his chattering teeth. They embraced and kissed passionately. "Children, come in here this minute," said Anne. They waded to the shore, and the September day was warm in the morning, but had turned cold and windy in the late afternoon. They shivered terribly. Their faces were blue. Anne, without a word of censure, hurried them home, got off their wet clothes, and got them into Mrs. Raymond's bed with hot water bottles at their feet. They still continued to shiver. Had they got a chill? Were they headed for pneumonia? You should have taken better care of us, Miss Shirley, said Gerald, still chattering. Course you should, said Geraldine. A distracted Anne flew downstairs and telephoned for the doctor. By the time he came, the twins had gotten warm, and he assured Anne that they were in no danger. If they stayed in bed till tomorrow, they would be all right. He met Mrs. Raymond coming up from the station on the way back, and it was a pale, almost hysterical lady who presently rushed in. "Oh, Miss Shirley, how could you have let my little treasures get into such danger?" "That's just what we told her, Mother," chorused the twins. "I trusted you. I told you." "I hardly see how I was to blame, Miss Raymond," said Anne, with eyes as cold as gray mist. "You will realize this, I think, when you are calmer. The children are quite all right. I simply sent for the doctor as a precautionary measure. If Gerald and Geraldine had obeyed me, this would not have happened." "I thought a teacher would have a little authority over children," said Miss Raymond bitterly. "Over children, perhaps, but not young demons," thought Anne. She said only, "Since you are here, Miss Raymond, I think I'll go home. I don't think I can be of any further service, and I have some schoolwork to do this evening." As one child, the twins hurled themselves out of bed and flung their arms around Anne. "I hope there'll be a funeral every week," cried Gerald, "'cause I like you, Miss Shirley, and I hope you'll come and look after us every time Mother goes away." "So do I," said Geraldine. "I like you much better than Miss Prouty." "Oh, ever so much," said Geraldine. "Will you put us in a story?" demanded Gerald. "Oh, do," said Geraldine. "I'm sure you meant well," said Miss Raymond tremulously. "Thank you," said Anne icily, trying to detach the twins' clinging arms. "Oh, don't let's quarrel about it," begged Miss Raymond, her enormous eyes filling with tears. "I can't endure quarreling with anybody." "Certainly not." Anne was at her stateliest, and Anne could be very stately. "I don't think there is the slightest necessity for quarreling. I think Gerald and Geraldine have quite enjoyed the day, though I don't suppose poor little Ivy Trent did." Anne went home feeling years older. "To think I ever thought Davy was mischievous," she reflected. She found Rebecca in the twilight garden gathering little pansies. "Rebecca dew, I used to think the adage, 'Children should be seen and not heard,' entirely too harsh, but I see its points now." "My poor darling, I'll get you a nice supper," said Rebecca dew, and they did not say, "I told you so." Chapter 5. Extract from Letter to Gilbert. "Mrs. Raymond came down last night and with tears in her eyes begged me to forgive her for her hasty behavior. If you knew a mother's heart, Miss Shirley, you would not find it hard to forgive." "I didn't find it hard to forgive as it was. There's really something about Miss Raymond I can't help liking. She was a duck about the dramatic club. Just the same, I did not say, 'Any Saturday you want to be away, I'll look after your offspring.' One learns by experience, even a person so incorrigibly optimistic and trustful as myself. I find that a certain section of Summerside society is at present very much exercised over the loves of Jarvis Morrow and Dovie Westcott, who, as Rebecca dew says, have been engaged for over a year, but can't get any forwarder. Aunt Kate, who is a distant aunt of Dovie's, to be exact, I think she's the aunt of a second cousin of Dovie's on the mother's side, is deeply interested in the affair because she thinks Jarvis is such an excellent match for Dovie. And also, I suspect, because she hates Franklin Westcott and would like to see him routed, horse, foot, and artillery. Not that Aunt Kate would admit she hated anybody, but Mrs. Franklin Westcott was a very dear friend of hers, and Aunt Kate solemnly avers that he murdered her. I'm interested in it, partly because I'm very fond of Jarvis and moderately fond of Dovie, and partly, I begin to suspect, because I am an introvert meddler in other people's business, always with excellent intentions, of course. The situation is briefly this. Franklin Westcott is a tall, somber, hard-bitten merchant, close and unsociable. He lives in a big, old-fashioned house called Elmcroft, just outside the town on the Upper Harbor Road. I've met him once or twice, but really know very little about him, except that he has an uncanny habit of saying something and then going off into a long chuckle of soundless laughter. He's never gone to church since hymns came in, and he insists on having all of his windows open even in winter storms. I confess to a sneaking sympathy with him in this, but I am probably the only person in Summerside who would. He's got into the habit of being a leading citizen, and nothing municipal dares to be done without his approval. His wife is dead. It is common report that she was a slave, unable to call her soul her own. Franklin told her, it is said, when he brought her home, that he would be master. Dovey, whose real name is Sybil, is his only child, a very pretty, plump, lovable girl of 19, with a red mouth always falling a little open over her small white teeth, glints of chestnut in her brown hair, alluring blue eyes, and sooty lashes so long you wonder if they can be real. Jen Pringle says it is her eyes that Jarvis is really in love with. Jen and I have actually talked the affair over. Jarvis is her favorite cousin. In passing, you wouldn't believe how fond Jen is of me, and I of Jen. She's really the cutest thing. Franklin Westcott has never allowed Dovey to have any beaux, and when Jarvis Morrow began to pay her attention, he forbade him in the house and told Dovey that there was to be no more running around with that fella. But the mischief has been done. Dovey and Jarvis were already fathoms deep in love. Everybody in town is in sympathy with the lovers. Franklin Westcott is really unreasonable. Jarvis is a successful young lawyer of good family with good prospects, and a very nice, decent lad in himself. Nothing could be more suitable, declares Rebecca Dew. Jarvis Morrow could have any girl he wanted in Summerside. Franklin Westcott has just made up his mind that Dovey is to be an old maid. He wants to be sure of a housekeeper when Aunt Maggie dies. Isn't there anyone who has any influence with him? I asked. Nobody can argue with Franklin Westcott. He's too sarcastical, and if you get the better of him, he throws a tantrum. I've never seen him in one of his tantrums, but I've heard Miss Prouty describe how he acted one time when she was there sewing. He got mad over something. Nobody knew what. He just grabbed everything in sight and flung it out the window. Milton's poems went flying clean over the fence into George Clark's lily pond. He's always kind of had a grudge at life. Miss Prouty says her mother told her that the yelps of him when he was born passed anything she ever heard. I suppose God had some reason for making men like that, but you'd wonder. No, I can't see any chance for Jarvis and Dovey unless they elope. It's a kind of low-down thing to do, though there's been a terrible lot of romantic nonsense talked about eloping. But this is a case where anybody would excuse it. I don't know what to do, but I must do something. I simply can't sit still and see people make a mess of their lives under my very nose, no matter how many tantrums Franklin Westcott takes. Jarvis Morrow is not going to wait forever. Rumor has it that he's getting out of patience already and has been savagely cutting Dovey's name out of a tree on which he had cut it. There is an attractive Palmer girl who is reported to be throwing herself at his head, and his sister is saying to have said that his mother has said that her son has no need to dangle for years at any girl's apron string. Really, Gilbert, I'm quite unhappy about it. It's moonlight tonight, beloved, moonlight on the poplars of the yard. Moonlight dimples all over the harbor where a phantom ship is drifting outwards. Moonlight on the old graveyard, on my own private valley, on the Storm King, and it will be moonlight in Lover's Lane and on the Lake of Shining Waters and the old Haunted Wood and Violet Vale. There should be fairy dances on the hills tonight. But Gilbert, dear, moonlight with no one to share is just moonshine. I wish I could take little Elizabeth for a walk. She loves a moonlit walk. We had some delightful ones when she was at Green Gables. But at home, Elizabeth never sees moonlight except from the window. I'm beginning to be a little worried about her, too. She's going on 10 now, and those two old ladies haven't the least idea what she needs, spiritually and emotionally. As long as she's had good food and good clothes, they cannot imagine her needing anything more. And it will be worse with every succeeding year. What kind of girlhood will the poor child have? All right, well, that concludes our storybook adventure for today. I hope you enjoyed that. And I look forward to coming back next Sunday and continuing with Anne of Windy Poplars. Until then, be joyful, my friends. Be the joy in everything you do. Remember to hug yourself daily and then share that hug. Go give someone else a hug. All right, nugs and joy. See you next week.